The missing piece for Elisha were the stories of 1 Kings 16 of Elijah. What was the seminary development for Elijah to be ready for ministry? What was the word that most encapsulated what he needed to know? Provision. And the provision seminary classes for the time of Elisha happened in chapter 4. We serve a God who provides. We serve a God who sees, a God who cares, a God who's already making provision now for a problem you don't even know you have. He's already working in your life in areas where you don't know. God is the ever-present one. The word I am is, the name Yahweh is actually I was, I am, I will be. It's a contraction of I am always on, always present. So God is never in the past tense. He's always present. Now, there's two ways to think of that. The one that I would want you to think of is the actual way to think of it is I am timelessly present. Meaning it doesn't make any difference what it seems like to you, it's now for God. I'm the now God. And as a result, the provider graciously accompanies us on life's ever-changing journey. And so if I'm going to frame chapter 4 any way, I'm going to frame it this way. God sees what nobody else sees. He provides what no one else can because He's the only one who extends His knowledge to every possible tentacle at one time. God knows the whole network. In 4:1-7, I want you to see God provides in the desperation of a faithful follower. So God provided a widow, and verses 1-4. Somebody read it nice and loud.
Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go, borrow vessels at large for yourself from all your neighbors, even empty vessels. Do not get a few. And you shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour out into all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full."
I want you to look at verse 1 for a minute, and I want you to understand something. It tells you that this woman feared the Lord. You are to know from that her debts were not frivolous. These are not people who just went out and badly calculated their money. These are people who didn't have because of the ministry that they were involved in. Now be very, very careful, because you're going to get under my skin real fast if you don't learn around here that I believe you can be in ministry, but you need to work your tail off and don't run around and ask people to pay your bills. That is not godly. It's become the thing ministries do, but it's not godly. I have Sirius XM. I love the Christian channel, but every time I turn it on, someone's asking me for money. Something's wrong with a Christianity that's always broke. Okay? Consequently, I want to tell you something. We ended up last year, what was it, $36,000 over our budget, and you never heard me ask for anything until I got up and said, praise God, we were $36,000 over the budget. People have to be encouraged to give the way God wants them to give, but don't get your hand in their pocket because you love Jesus. I love Jesus and I want to go to Tibet, so you need to pay for it. Stop. Get out there and work as hard as you can and people will match that. Second, sometimes we do the best we can, but God chooses to provide through the hands of somebody else, and the purpose of that is to increase the circle of blessing. So in verse 1, she is now in trouble, but she's not in trouble for frivolity. She's in trouble because God wants to expand the circle of blessing. Now this is a side note, but I think it's worthwhile because of the ages of the people in the room, so I want you to hear it. It's easy to get in over your head. You have to be wise about your financial life. I clipped this out. Ellen is 30 years old. She has a $3,500 balance on her Citibank credit card, and it's at 18%. She makes the minimum payment every month. How old will she be when her card is paid off? $3,500 minimum payment. How old will she be if she's 30 now? How old will she be when she pays off the $3,500 on minimum payments?
Probably 80 or 90.
It's actually 70, but you're right in the right ballpark. 70 years old. Listen to what I just said, because that's not what the credit card commercial looks like. Susan and Tom needed a new washing machine, so they went to Sears. They found one for $299. They got the Sears charge and made the minimum payment every month, and by the time the washing machine was paid off, they had paid $1,199 for that $299 machine. You've got to learn, Luke 16, the children of this world are better about using assets of this world for right causes. The children of the kingdom have to get wise how to spend money for eternal purposes. There's a reason why we can get up and say, has God called you to a mission field? And people sitting in a room will go, I believe God's called me and I'm only $42,000 in debt. And here's the thing now. Now the thing is, oh, it's okay because it's school debt. Do you know that the school debt problem we have in America is bigger than the mortgage debt problem we have in America? And there are no assets except for the brains of young people. Now, I'm all for education and I love good brains. You know that. I'm not saying it's not worth the investment. I'm saying you need to be very wise. And then you need to be very aggressive about paying for things. Okay? Because it's easy to look at minimum payments and think that's going to do it. Let me just say this. If you buy a car and you go and you take payments on the car, I'm not against that. But look at the blue book value of the car. If the blue book value of the car is, say, $5,000, and you borrowed the car and you owe $6,000 on it, pay it down below the $5,000 mark. Because if you ever have to dump the car, you will get at least what you owe on the car. And you go, well, I'm not going to get rid of the car. Yeah, not unless somebody hits it. But if they hit it, they will replace the value at what they posted at, not what you owe. And you'll be stuck making a car payment on a car you used to have. That only applies to 5% of everybody who's here on Sunday morning. So don't feel like it might be you, but it might be you. Okay, look, here's the bottom line. Elisha directed the woman to do the one thing she could do. In verse 2, he told her to do what? What do you have that's enough for God to use? What does he ask her? Not what don't you have, because that's what we do when we're in debt. We look at what we don't have. He says, go look in the cupboard, tell me what you got. And what does she say? I got a jar of oil. Okay? So here's the bottom line. A small jar of oil can be multiplied by God. The last of the meal in a barrel can feed Elijah and a widow with her son back in 1 Kings 16. 5 small loaves and 2 salt fish can feed thousands when Jesus touches it. A stick in the hands of Moses can become a hungry snake that eats up Pharaoh's snakes off the floor of Pharaoh's palace when God touches it. A jawbone of a donkey can be a fierce weapon to an empowered person in Judges. What truly matters is that you take what you have and give it to God. The point of verse 2 is, you give me what you got and I'll give you what you don't have. If you want to understand how it works, it's that simple. Andrew, you'll never get from God what he has for you if you don't give him what you already got. If you hold back your time, talent, and treasure, you won't get what God wants to give you. But you lay it down and say, God, I am yours, it is yours, you can do with me what you want, and God will pour it on. But you got to know that. And by the way, you can fake it with me, but you can't with him. Sometimes it isn't that we don't have, it's that we have too much. For some of us, we have too many ways to answer the problem, and we never know if it was God. This is one of the problems with plastic. If you can whip out plastic and pay for it, you don't know if God was going to give it to you. And one of the reasons I try to wait on things, I know. I mean, I've been 5 years going to buy this Fiat 500. 5 years. And I keep getting to the edge of it. I could go buy it today. My wife even said I could. I'm allowed. I don't have, Jesus didn't let me yet. And until Jesus lets me, I can't buy it. But I can read about them. I can look at pictures of them. I can know all about them. I just can't own one. Here's the thing. I think sometimes we jump at what we can do, and then we don't let God do what he can do. Go down to verses 3 and 4. There's an observation I want to make. The woman was instructed to gather up vessels and close the door with her and her sons inside and pour them. So God helped them. But not until they were specifically obedient to work at the problem. Do you see that? God doesn't do anything until they're specifically obedient to follow his word, ask him the question, listen to what his word says, and go and do it. In addition to the potential to fail her creditor, now she had to follow the word of the Lord in spite of the fact that her neighbors would surely think she was losing her grip on reality. I mean, come on. She's going out and borrowing saucepans and she doesn't have anything. Don't you think people next door were going, woo, she's gone off the edge? Why did it say close the door? Did anybody else pick that out? It bugged me when I first read the passage. Why was she supposed to close the... God was about to do something. Her neighbors are questioning her sanity because she's running out of everything, but she just borrowed every Tupperware in the neighborhood. And people are going, you don't even have leftovers. Why do you need Tupperware? But it says close the door. Mark chapter 5 says that Jesus took only the parents of a little girl into the room when he went to raise up the little girl. Acts chapter 9 says that Peter raised Dorcas, but he did it in private. Jesus told his disciples to pray in private. Let me just say this. The big, serious things God will do in your life will often be in the quiet of a room with you. Would you do me a favor? Don't go directly to social media with whatever God is working on in your heart. God loves pickles. He likes to pickle you in something. Flash frying, that's not a God thing. What I mean by that is a lot of us, the second we get something, we're running out to tell the world. Give it some time to pickle. Give it a little time to brine and sit in your heart and change and flavor everything about who you are. Because if you get too loose and too fast with what God is doing, it becomes, you're hiking the football, but you're not carrying it. It's not in your hands. You barely have it and you're instructing someone. How many of you know what I mean when I say it's easy to turn the Bible into a book that you are learning so that you can instruct? I have this lesson I have to do, so I'm going to learn this so I can hand it off. And then it's almost like a hot potato, but it never actually gets in. You never feel the grains of the thing in your hand. So here's what I love. Look at verses 5 and 6. Somebody read it.
So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, and they were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he said to her, "There is not one vessel more," and the oil stopped.
Okay. Notice, make a note, the level of the blessing was directly corresponding to the level of the obedience. The more vessels, the more blessing. All they had to do was say, 2, that's good enough, then that's the level of blessing they would have gotten. If you bring 46, you get 46. If you bring 2, you get 2. The level of obedience was directly corresponding to the level of blessing. The more vessels they brought, the more oil they got from God. See, once again, it was the emptiness that God blessed. Think about that for a minute. It was the emptiness God blessed. We keep thinking, get full, and then give God a plan and he'll use you. No, it's the emptiness God blesses. It's the when you bring it to him and go, God, I am desperate because I don't know what to do. He says, now I can fill you. Because when your hands are so full of everything else, I can't do anything with that. Did you ever try to get somebody to help you? Your hands are full and you're trying to get somebody to help you and everybody's walking along with all their stuff. It's not till people have empty hands they can help. And we are not in a kingdom that makes sense out of this, but God is looking for empty-handed people. Come into this with, I need to marry a guy who has a British accent, who's 30 or under, who has this kind of car, and God can't use you because your list is too long. Your hands are too full. Get down to verses 8 through 10. Somebody read it.
Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. She said to her husband, "Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God, passing by us continually. Please let us make a little walled-up chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, and it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there.
Okay, if in the first story of 1 through 7, God taught him that emptiness is what he blesses, in the second story, Elisha's busy doing a work for God, and he's not seeking any particular blessing or comfort. This was over and above the normal blessings of God. So what happens is God provides from this sensitive-hearted other believer things that this believer doesn't even know he needs. Is that clear? The prophet doesn't recognize that he needs a break. In fact, some of the best people I know in ministry are running themselves way too hard and really need a good vacation. Elisha's lesson is this. God's neatest blessings are often given to us when he moves somebody else to take care of us and we don't see it coming. It's even more fun when you didn't ask for it, didn't know it was going to happen, and it just happened. Each of us can be moved by God to see a need that other people don't see. So I want you to think about something you may not have thought about. Let's say that next month you get a raise. Your job gives you more than you expected. The first thing all Christians think is, I need to meet my obligations. The second thing they think is, I should save for a rainy day, because that's very Solomonic and very good, wise, sage advice. But the one that only Christians will think is, you know what? My other kid down the row there might have a need. How could I maybe bless somebody with this? And you know what? When it's the coolest God thing, they don't even get to know where it came from. Because it's too easy for me to give you something, and if you know it's me, you're going to thank me, and then I'm going to be built up by it. But if you don't know it's me, and I can simply be used of God to touch something in your life, and some of you are sitting there going, yeah, please, Pastor, anytime you want to do that. But you know, I know you're broke, but out of the hearts of broke people or some, you know that giving comes, the majority of giving in America comes from people who are actually below the average line. If you're 30,000 or under, you give the bulk of what, it's not the millionaires supporting the churches, it's the people that don't have a lot. And that's not even talking about the people who are just caring for the people in their neighborhood. But look at this. She thought through what was really going on in his life. And look at verse 10. I love verse 10. She thought, what does he need to really enjoy this better? So she says, I want you to make an upper chamber. He's going to need a bed, a table, a chair, and a lampstand. In other words, she's going right down to, she's doing what ladies do, you know, coming up with this whole list for her husband. But she's also saying, listen, buddy, you'll frame out the room and go, that's good enough, you know. No, I want it nice, and I want it to provide for his needs. One of the neatest things you can learn about the provision of God is that when somebody's really sensitive, they'll think about it all the way around. They'll think about all the needs. Now, there's a third story. This hooks to the second one, but 11 to 17. Somebody read it.
One day he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, call the Shunammite. And when he called her, she stood before him. He said to him, say now to her, behold, you have been careful for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army? And she answered, I live among my own people. So he said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, surely she has no son and her husband is old. He said to her, he said, call her. When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, at this season next year you will embrace a son. And he said, no, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. The woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year. And Elijah had said to her.
Now, I want you to see that God provided from a grateful heart of the prophet. This time it's going in the opposite direction, but it's believer to believer. Notice verses 11 and 12. When we take the time to feel the warmth, we're thankful for the sun. When we take the time to feel the warmth, we're thankful for the sun. What ends up happening to us is we tend to only see what we don't have and talk a lot about that. But you know, God has really given us a lot. Elisha had Gehazi ask her what he could do for her. And he suggested some options, but they weren't what she needed. I just think it's pretty important to be perceptive in verse 13. And I think it's pretty important for women to mark in their Bible, men are not perceptive. And for women and for men to mark in their Bible, men, you're not very perceptive, okay? If they would have chosen what to give her, they'd have given her the wrong thing. But out of her own mouth, this is what did she need? Her husband was old. He was going to die. There was nobody to inherit. She was going to be penniless. It's not just that she wanted to have a baby and hold a baby. By the way, that in and of itself is a thing, that whole bonding thing, and women, oh, babies, you know, that's fine. But really, for her, it was about, I am done when my husband dies. So in verses 14 to 17, here's my observation. God sees the obedient heart and blesses the needs that aren't even expressed to others. Sometimes what God will do for you is He'll drop into your life the thing you most want because you're just busy doing what He told you to do. Ladies, listen to me. If you really, truly, in your heart of hearts, know that you are called to be a wife and a mother, that is an incredibly high place. You are God to a child in the beginning. Please know this. Be busy working for God, doing what He wants, and let Him find the man. If you're scouring the earth for the man, you're probably not going to find as good as God is going to bring to you. But if you trust God with your future, God will bring your future about. Now, I also would say, be where men are. Like, you know, don't go to a desert island and say, oh, God, make him swim here. You know, that's just, don't do that. And that is why in numerous times I have sent people to college and career groups that were bigger because there were more. We actually happen to have more of a collection of your age in this church than most churches. But I will tell you that if you go back home and you're the only person your age, unless you're planning on marrying somebody 12 years older than you, find a place where they are, okay? But work on your godliness and follow God. Now, go on to the next story, because there's another story, and this is a tender story as well, and I want to get to a break, but go to 18 to 37. In 18, notice how the stories are linked together. We're back to the Shunammite, but this time we're talking now about the child that was the promise of the last story. So, bing, out pops a baby, and she's got her promise, and she is excited. Now watch what God does, because one of the aspects of this is still training Elisha. It's not just blessing people. God is teaching him something. When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. He said to his father, my head, my head. And he said to his servant, carry him to his mother. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon and then died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. 22, she called her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys that I may run to the man of God and return. And he said, why will you go to him today? It's neither the new moon or the Sabbath. And she said, it will be well. She doesn't tell him the boy's dead. She says, I need to see Elisha. Why do you need to see Elisha today? Well, it's going to be well. I just need to see him. The man is smart enough to shut up and let her do what she's trying to do. And then it says, she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you. So she went and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, behold, there is a Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. It's not well. He's dead. It's the opposite of well is dead, okay? When she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught hold of his feet. Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her. Why does Gehazi want to push the woman off? There's a disrespect that Gehazi is concerned about, but there's something else. This is a house that his master goes to and stays in. A woman hugging him or caressing him or holding him would bring a negative statement of anybody who observed it about the fact that he goes in and out of that house. Gehazi's trying to protect his master. That's what he does. Master says, leave her alone. Her soul's troubled. And the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Notice Elisha's lesson. How do I know this is a lesson for Elisha? Because Elisha's learning. And he turns and he goes, God has chosen not to tell me that she was coming or what it was about. I would make a note next to 27 that even though you're the leader, you don't always have what you need to have. Don't cover it. Don't play cards you don't have. Don't act like, yeah, I knew it. I knew she was coming. You didn't know she was coming. Don't tell the people who follow you things you don't know. Be honest. I had no idea she was coming, and this time God chose not to tell me why. Verse 28, then she said, did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? The accusation wasn't against the Lord, it was against him. But who's she really upset at? The Lord. Remember this about verse 28. If you work for God, people, when they're mad at God, will be mad at you. It's not you, it's God they're mad at. They feel God cheated them, therefore you get the blame. And if you don't understand that, you can't pastor, you can't shepherd, you can't lead, you can't take that group of women in that Bible study and effectively minister to them. Sometimes they want to hit you because they can't hit Jesus. And so here's the bottom line. He said to Gehazi, gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, go your way. If you meet any man, don't salute him. Anybody salutes you, don't answer him. And lay my staff on the lad's face. The mother of the lad said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. Don't send me back. I'm not going with him. I'm staying right here. If this is going to get dealt with, I'm not leaving here until this is done. I'm looking you right in the eye. If you got something to say, you're going to have to say it in front of me. Then the Gehazi passed on before them, laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him, the lad has not awakened. Now, here's the interesting thing. Elisha doesn't know what's going on. He's already said, the Lord hasn't told me anything. So you're in the middle of a crisis in your ministry. You're being attacked and accused, and you don't have any word from God. Please know that God never promised to work on your time schedule, ever. God is God and you are not. So you can beg him for something, and if he doesn't do it, it's because he has chosen not to, and he's got a reason, and since you're not him, you don't get to know what it is. And if you can't do that, then you're asking him to work for you, and you're not willing to work for him. So when Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered, and here you go. He shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and he lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands, and he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went up and stretched himself out on him, and the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. He called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. So he called her. And when she came into him, he said, take up your son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. What was going on? What Elisha needed to know is that he was going to get blindsided. He had no idea what was coming, and God wanted to use him and put him in play in a way he didn't know. Now, here's the thing. All of the blessings of God are his property, including that child. If you don't know this, write it down. Your kids aren't yours. When God gives them to you, they're still his. They do not belong to you. My relationship with you is based on the fact that God has graciously put you in my life for a short time. And then, Andrew, I get this year with you, and then I lose you. I don't get to be in your life. I would like to, because you're a regular comedy act. But honestly, you make me smile. You do. You make me smile. I don't get to be in your life forever. So I have to treat this like this is God's Laura. And I get to be in Laura's life for a short time. Now, being her pastor since she was like, I don't know, an infant or whatever, I've had more chances, but she's a girl, so we didn't really ever talk. It's not, I don't talk, I may say hi, whatever. That's it. But none of you are mine. I've had 3 children stood there as these sloppy, gooey children were born. They're not mine. You didn't come in with anything that was yours, and you're not going out with anything that's yours. And here's the bottom line. It's all his. She needed to understand that, but Elisha also needed to deal with somebody in the extremity of this hurt. The other thing I noticed in 22 to 25 was that the provision was very personal, and God's work in her was not simply about the child. It was about what God was doing deep within her. She wasn't ready to share with anyone what God was doing because she didn't know yet. She just knew it would be what God intended, and so she says, it's going to be okay. I want you to remember something. When you're going through real trouble, grace is extended to the person that's going through it, not to the person who lives with them or the roommate who lives next to them. So she got God's grace for the situation, went running after the man of God and thought, somehow this is going to work out. I don't know. Now go down to verses 26 and 27. I want to say something to you that from a worldly perspective is going to sound really ludicrous. It's going to sound so bizarre that I'm going to say that ahead of time so it sounds less bizarre, okay? The death of the child wasn't the real problem. The death of the child wasn't the real problem. She came to Gehazi and said, all is well. She continued to Elisha. She grabbed his feet, asking, why was God doing this to her? And he says, I don't know. The death of the child wasn't the whole issue. The real issue was that the woman asked to be protected from the emotional harm, and God didn't listen. That was the issue. What kind of God do you serve that will open you up to that kind of pain and not protect you? Well, you serve a God who knows what you need, not what you ask for. So when she turned to Elisha, he didn't know why. And God said no to her desire to be kept from the pain, to say yes to another more important purpose, to help Elisha show himself as a forerunner. There's a big piece to this story I want you to write right next to verses 26 and 27, Luke 7:14. You'll miss this story because the story is based on your knowledge of geography, which I'm sure you're all walking around with the geography of the Bible in your mind, right? No. You have to understand something. In the middle of the Jezreel Valley, there is a hill called the Hill of Moreh. Moreh means the teacher, okay? On one side of the Hill of Moreh, on the south side, is the village of Shunem. The Shunammite woman was from Shunem. Shocking how that happens, right? Okay. Now, here's what I want you to understand. On the other side of the same mountain is a little village called Ne'emah or Nain in Luke 7. And in Luke 7, Jesus is walking by and he hears a funeral dirge of a woman who is a widow who has lost a child. And Jesus walks up and raises up the child. And in Luke 7:14, in Hebrew, it would read identical to what he said, what the Shunammite was told by Elisha. Arise, take up your son. What Jesus does is he raises the child off the platform called a bier, raises the child up off the bier and says, give the child to the mother, which is an exact statement of Elisha. And the response of the people was, one greater than the prophets is among us. In the story of Elisha, it sounds like God is opening the woman to emotional pain. What he's doing is writing her into the eternal book of God, and her lesson becomes part of what the Son of God on earth will quote. In other words, her pain is bigger than she thought she could handle, but her story is more impacting than she would ever have thought. She's just a gal from a small agricultural village in the middle of the Jezreel Valley. Who's ever going to know about her? You do. You just read about her. So God's story for you is bigger than you think it is. And if he opens and exposes your life to emotional pain, it is because he's going to write your story in bigger ways than you know. And you got to understand that God is saying no to this to say yes to something bigger. That's why he does it.